Hi friends, in this video I will be talking about effective communication, which is our next topic in the descriptor. So before I go ahead, I would like to explain what exactly the effective communication is, and that I would explain with the one small story uh, about Jack and Max, okay, who were walking into the religious service to the church. Um, so while they were there, Jack wonders whether it would be all right to smoke while praying. So to this, Max replied, "Why don't you ask the priest?" So Jack goes up to the priest and asks, "Priest, may I smoke while I pray?" So, but the priest says, "No, son, you may not. That that's utter disrespect to our religion." So Jack goes back to Max and tells him what good priest told him. Uh, so Max says, "I'm not surprised you asked the wrong question. Let me try." So Max goes up to the priest and asks the same question in a different way. "Priest, may I pray while I smoke?" To which priest eagerly replied, "By all means, my son, by all means." So moral of the story is, the reply you get depends on the question you ask. So that's the basis to our today's topic, which is about effective communication. Before we go ahead, so first we need to understand what exactly communication is. Communication is something that evokes the shared meaning or the common meaning to another person. So that will be defined as a communication, and that means that the person who is sending the information and the person who is receiving the information understands it the same way it has been received or it has been transmitted. So from here I will talk another terminology which is related to communication: interpersonal communication. So interpersonal communication is defined between two or more people in an organization. How two and more people they communicate with each other, and how they assign meaning to the different thing communicated to them in the organization. And there's another terminology which you should know is about communicator and the receiver. Who is the communicator? The person who sending the message, and the receiver is the person who receives the message. And another thing which is relevant to it is, which you should know, once a person who is sending the message and the person who is receiving the message, there is something called perceptual screen, which works as a window between how the message has been sent and how the message has been received by the receiver. So what is this perceptual screen? Some part of it we have already discussed in our perception topic, where the different perception which operates in our communications and how we receive the information, the various perceptual biases with regard to prejudices, our stereotypes, halo effect. So that color our perception when we receive some information. Okay, so the perceptual screen work as a window which kind of work as a sometime as a distorter to the information has been received, or it's possible that if you are aware of your biases or your perceptual biases, you may not let them interfere into the message which has been received through the sender. So it is one of the important factor in effective communication. How you receive a particular information depends on how your perceptual window works and what sort of a awareness you have about the various biases which are operating. Now, another thing which you should know about message. What is message? The thought and the feeling that the communicator intends to evoke in the receivers is called a message. Okay. Message is the actual part which should be encoded by the receiver, okay, which has that information which sender wants to share it with the receiver. Now, the another part which is important in the effective communication is feedback. Feedback occurs when the information is fed back to the sender that completes two-way communication. So feedback is a tool which is used for effective two-way communication, because sender mid transmits certain information. How the receiver has received it, how he has interpreted it, will be totally dependent on the use of this particular tool, feedback, okay, which will let the sender know how you have understood the information or what sort of a doubts you have in your mind. So feedback is another important tool which is kind of a use for an effective two-way communication. Now, another part to the effective communication is the language, the words, their pronunciation, and the method of combining them used and understood by the group of people. So that is what language is about. So English is the most spoken language in the world. Many companies abroad, those their native language is not English, they have adopted English as their first language for the communication. So same way, though the Chinese is the most spoken language in the world, but still English has its own dominance in the organizations all over the world. So English has been used as a language to actually communicate different information in the organization. So language is another thing you should know, which is important. Now, the next important thing is data. Okay, data is something which is being interpreted and analyzed, which is a part of a particular message. Okay, so the data is something which gives you some factual information about the message being conveyed to you. Then information, that is something, data which has certain meaning to the person who interprets or analyzes them, becomes an information for that person. Now comes the richness of the data, the ability of a medium or the various tools which are used to convey meaning to the receiver will be dependent. The richness will be dependent on that particular medium. Okay, how you use it. You may use oral communication. You may use written communication. So depending on what sort of a data has been shared, the richness will be dependent on which particular medium or which particular tool you have used to communicate. Okay, so research has its own kind of a findings which talks about when you're sharing the data, okay, when you're sharing the information, so which different tools will be more effective. I will be talking about it in detail later on. I will talk about it in detail in the next few slides. I will be discussing. So far I have talked about various terminologies, okay, which explains the various part of effective communication. So we talked about what communication is, okay, what is interpersonal communication, who is a communicator, who is a receiver, what is perceptual screen, what is message, how the message has been defined, and feedback as a tool for two-way communication. And the language is an important parameter, the uses of words, pronunciation. So together, you use a particular language, English, Hindi, or any other foreign language, French, German. So this is a language you may use to communicate different messages. Okay, and then we talked about what is data, what is information and what is the richness of information. Okay. So basically, putting all this together, now we have two important element in effective communication. One is the communicator, another is the receivers. So in between, there's a message, there's a context, there are feelings, there are emotions, which are the way the message has been in the context, or with the kind of feelings the message has been conveyed. And of course, the perceptual screens, which I talked about, the perceptual windows we talked about, that work as a mediator, how the message has been received by the receivers. And then comes the feedback mechanism, by which the receiver shares his thoughts and the interpretation he had about a particular message being received. Okay. And then it leads to a particular event which is dependent on how the receiver has interpreted the information shared with him. So this is the basic interpersonal communication model which so far we discussed. Now I was talking about the information richness and the data capacity, which is an important element, okay, in terms of what will be the effect of how you have used different methods or mediums, which will determine how effectively you can put forward the different messages being shared in the organization, or different information being shared in the organization. So basically, research says that when information richness need to be retained, then face-to-face discussion has the highest impact. Then telephonic conversation has the second, which means high impact. Okay. And electronic mails, individual letters, and personalized note has a moderate effect on the receivers. And flyers information or the formal numeric reports has a very low or lowest impact on the receiver. On the other hand, when you are sharing certain data, numerics, or some sort of tabular or numeric information, then research says that face-to-face discussion has the least impact. It has the lowest impact, because people are distracted when you discuss numbers face-to-face, so the impact is lowest. On the other hand, telephonic and electronic, again it's on the lower side, or moderate to low side impact is there when you share certain data over the phone or through electronic mails. Then personalized note has a moderate impact, or formal written report has a high impact. And most importantly, the highest impact of the way you share the data is through the formal numeric reports, which has certain tables, some graphs, some kind of interpretation of numbers. So that has the highest impact on the receiver. So basically, the point I'm trying to make is, when the information richness need to be created, then face-to-face discussion is most important. But when you are sharing a certain numeric data, then the formal reports, the manuals, that has a more impact when you share certain information. So that is about how you can be effectively use different methods depending on what sort of information you are sharing with the receivers. So these two findings you need to keep it in mind while sharing the data, and when sharing certain message with regard to one-to-one information. It's required that have a more impact when you meet people face-to-face. Okay. So like I said, when you're sharing data, you need to share certain tables, graphics, numbers in a formal report to the people, so it will have a better impact there. Now, now what type of organizational communications are there? Okay, so that basically there are and so before that, actually, I should talk about what is the direction of communication in an organization. There are two-way direction, actually three ways. Direction is there of communication. One is upward communication, another is downward communication, okay, and then comes at a lateral communication stage. What is upward communication, what is downward communication, what is lateral communications? We'll take one by one. So let's start with downward communication. Okay, when the top management, which has certain which is responsible for strategizing, doing planning for the organization, assigning duties, roles and responsibilities, giving feedback on certain products, services, then actually downward communication is used to communicate with the different stakeholder or the different level in the organization, middle level or the bottom level or the front line people. So that so the direction for such kind of information is downward. So it's called a downward communication. Okay. Then comes upward communication. Upward communication is communicated by the frontliner and the middle level managers to the top management when they want to share certain information with regard to feedback regard to the policies, the strategies, and the outcome or the feedback received from customers. When they want to share certain information with regard to that, upward communication is that's the direction of the communication, upwards. Okay. And lateral communication happens between the managers or the employees at the similar level, those who are in a similar position, like for example marketing manager communicating to the finance manager or the HR managers. They are at the same level and they are communicating with each other with regard to various issues or the coordination required among the different departments. So when they are communicating, that's called a lateral communication. So this is the direction of communication in which the formal communication happens in the organization. Now, what is actually, how many types of organizational communications are there? So basically, there are two major types: formal communication and the informal communication. Okay. So formal communication is with regard to emails, the memos, the different electronic ways used to communicate with the employees, both by upward or downwards or at the lateral level. So that these are the formal communication which happens within the hierarchy, whether top to bottom or bottom to top or at the similar level or the lateral level. So that is something called a formal communication. Apart from it, there is an effective communication which happen by way of informal communication through grapevine. It's called a grapevine communication also, which is a very important method to communicate where people share certain information informally, may not be in the similar level at a hierarchy. So it's called a grapevine communication, which is an important impact, which has an important factor, how if the message will be received by the people and how you can prepare the organization with regard to certain decision organization is going to take in future. So grapevine informal communication is an important tool which has been used very effectively by the different organizations. So that is called a grapevine communication. So now there are various methods which are used to actually communicate this formal or informal communication in the organization. So first in the row is through oral communication, okay, by speaking, by conducting meetings, face-to-face meetings. You can have video conferencing, you can have a telephonic conversations. That explains the various oral communication which happens among the employees in the organization. Then comes the other method is written communication. The various modes, various mediums which are used to effectively communicate with the people through writing mails, letters, uh, PowerPoints, emails. I've already said it. Instant messaging now. Nowadays, various offices have their WhatsApp groups. Okay, like we students, teachers have various group where we keep posting certain formal messages to you with regard to sharing instant information, okay, with regard to the guest lectures or with regard to any event happening in the campus. So instant messaging facilities is used through WhatsApp or through email messages. You have your groups, and within a fraction of second the same information is shared with all the group members, all the classmates, so all the people at the campus. So that is something called instant messaging. Okay, that's another method which is used to communicate. Then comes social media. Nowadays various tools have been used. Twitter is there, Facebook is there, blogs are there. So various social media tools are used to share the information with the people. Now within this we have a third method of communication is the non-verbal communication. Okay, where through body movements, through gestures, you try to communicate something. How you're feeling, what is your feeling, how strongly you feel about it. Through gestures, through body language, you convey certain messages to the sender or to the receivers. Okay, and you try to communicate. So these are the various methods which are used to communicate. So I will again summarize it here once again before we move ahead. So we talked about direction of communication in an organization. We have a downward communication, we have a upward communication, then we have a lateral communication. Okay, then with regard to organizational communication, we have a formal communication, then we have a grapevine communication. Okay, and then with regard to various modes used to communicate, we talked about oral communication. Within that we have subcategories like meetings, like video conferencing, telephones. Okay, so video calls, all these oral communication methods are used to communicate with the different stakeholders in the organization. Then we talked about written communications, where we talked about letters, emails, written letters, memos, notice board, flyers. Okay, emails, PowerPoint. In a meeting we used various PowerPoint to communicate various information with all the stakeholders involved in that meeting. Then we talked about instant messaging, WhatsApp. We talked about text messaging, social media, where Twitter, blogs, Facebook, Instagram, all these different tools are used to share information. And the last we talked about the non-verbal communication, where the various gestures, body language, all these different modes are used to communicate and let know how you are feeling, what is your how strongly you are feeling by using different body gestures. You try to communicate it with other people, like with your body language, whether you are happy or you are unhappy. You communicate certain cues with your facial expression, your body language. So basically these are the various methods which are used to communicate with the employees. So guys, that's all for today. I'll be continuing in the next video, we will talk about various we talk about listening, how effective listening is an important part in effective communication. Within that, we will talk about reflective listening, and we will talk about emphasis of reflective listening. Okay, how you need to use it. Okay, and we'll talk about verbal, non-verbal, reflective listening. Then we will have one-way or two-way communication, how you can use it effectively, and then we talk about 5 keys for effective supervisory communication. So that is what we'll talk about. Okay, so and also we'll try to cover certain barriers in communication, like physical status differences, gender differences, cultural differences, language differences. So these are the various barriers we will talk about in the next video, which I will be sharing it shortly with you. And also we'll talk about defensive communication, okay, and non-defensive communication, and different pattern of defensive communication, and the different defensive tactics used by people in the organization, okay, and how you can use a non-defensive communication as a powerful tool. That is what we will talk about in the next video. And also we will have in detail discussion about non-verbal communication, various types of non-verbal communication like proxemics, kinesics, facial and eye behavior, paralanguage. So all this various part of non-verbal communication, various parameters of non-verbal communication, we will be discussing in the next video. So thank you guys. If you have any doubts or if you have any kind of questions to ask, you feel free to write to me. You can message me, you can email me, or you can call me anytime. So that's all for today. Take care of yourself and stay healthy. See you in the next video. Thank you.